well as helping and advising on protection and insurance needs as well. So let's go to the first slide. So as we do it each and every week, we've got the mortgage market update. We've got news coming out every day in the market around where the market lies. Are we going through a bust? If we're going through a bust cycle coming up, the answer is, who knows what's going to happen going forward in 2022 and the following years. But what COVID has shown us, that the real estate market is extremely resilient. It has been fantastic for a lot of people over the last couple of years. And my small prediction is I think it will continue throughout 2022 as well. With regards to interest rates, what I would say is there's a lot of noise in the US, particularly around raising interest rates in 2022. And Jerome Powell, head of the US Reserve, has mentioned that rates are appropriate and they are going to be upcoming very, very soon. So a lot of things do follow when the US sneezes. So do watch out for the US market in particular. The UK average house price has risen and it has continued to rise over the last few decades. And now we're at the average house price of 242,000 as of December 2021, according to Zoopla's house price index. Rents are also up, and that goes to show, we're sort of coming out of COVID now. We're seeing it behind us, hopefully, and rents are actually going back up. So you can actually see in prime central London, the tubes, the central lines, the overgrounds are very much busy as usual. And what that means is a lot of people are going back to the office to work and also moving back to London real estate for either owner occupying or renting for their own uses. So it's clear to see that rents are going up in London and surrounding towns. Average UK house prices have risen over the last 12 months and they have gone to double digits. So it's good to see for owner occupiers and property investors. Probably not so much for people that are trying to join the housing ladder. But what I always say is one door closes, one always opens. And what I mean by that is the mortgage market in particular is extremely, extremely competitive with regards to rates, terms, fees, and everything alike. And what that means is you can, if you wanted to get on the ladder, borrow up to 95% of the purchase price subject to income and expenditure. So it's not all doom and gloom for first-time buyers. All eyes will remain on inflation. We are above that 5% figure at the moment. Who knows when it's going to come down? Is it artificial? Is it a supply and demand issue? I think, to be honest with you, it is a supply and demand issue. I think it will come down. I don't think rising interest rates are going to knock inflation down substantially. But who knows what's going to happen? But I think it is a short-lived inflation bubble that will certainly come down over the next 18 months. As I mention each and every week, it's about the EPC requirements. Now, what you all need to be aware of, in particular for those that own portfolio properties, is the potential EPC requirements that are coming into effect as of 2025, which is still currently being negotiated in Parliament. But if they do proceed with what they've discussed on the card, that means all existing tenancies will need to be a rating of A to C from 2025, and existing tenancies from 2028 and any new tenancies from 2025. And what that means is currently to obtain a buy-to-let mortgage, your property must have an A to E energy performance rating. And what they are saying, any new tenancies would have to have an A to C rating, and any existing from 2028 to have an A to C as well. So bear that in mind. If you are looking to buy property, do look for properties with a rating of A to C in particular. If your own properties are Ds and Es in particular, see how you can add the rating and increase the rating to an A to C to benefit from lower energy costs, which I think we all need at the moment, because my gas bill, electric bill was extortionate last quarter, but that's another conversation for another day. But the other thing I wanted to say is, if you do benefit from an energy rating between A and C, you also benefit from preferential mortgage interest rates as well. And a lot of lenders have catched on to this over the last 6 months in particular, and they've got all these green products that they're doing, hence why I've put the green color there in some particular words there. So A to C as soon as possible, guys. And if you're looking to buy property, also A to C is the way forward. This next slide is about how we can improve your chances of getting a mortgage. The first one is having a large deposit. It'll provide you, I know it's easier said than done, but having a larger deposit means a lower loan to value, better chance of obtaining the mortgage, and lower interest rates. I've talked about this on other weekly chats or mortgage market updates, but the documents that you will always need to have to hand, and in particular, if you are self-employed, we need your latest 3 years tax calculations. Alongside that is the tax year overviews. If you don't know what they are, don't worry, send your accountant that email to say, can I have your latest 3 years tax calculations and tax year overviews? And if they haven't got a clue what that is, then you need to sack that accountant. But that's another conversation for another day as well. What we'll also need is bank statements. That's the latest bank statements to show an audit of your income if you are salaried into that bank account, as well as the bank statement that shows general expenses for utility bills, food, and the like. Passport and driving license is key. Just for those that move home or are renting and move properties quite often, make sure that your addresses are up to date on your driving licenses and your bank statements, and make sure they are valid. I know a lot of people may not have traveled over the last 2 years, but do ensure that your passports are valid ahead of applying for any mortgages, because we will, as mortgage brokers and the lenders, will need proof of ID and proof of address. It must be valid and up to date. Having this all to hand will make the application a much more smoother process, and I can assure you of that. It's also worthwhile checking your credit score before we start any applications. Now, during the mortgage fact find with ourselves, we always ask all our applicants to share with us any issues around credit, and that could be small things such as missed payments on a credit card, a car loan, anything of that nature. It's very, very much key that we understand. If there are missed payments, we will ask you to obtain a credit report, and that just ensures that we're not just submitting any application to any old lender, because every lender's got their own key criteria that they adhere to. So we want to do our thorough research on the first day, rather than coming back and resubmitting applications, because that means a hard footprint on your credit file once the application is submitted, and that will then scupper any chances. So it will scupper your credit scoring, and it would reduce and may look negative on the next application, and so on. So we want to get it right first time. But we will, as mortgage brokers, hold your hands, share with you the good principles, good guides, and how to have a seamless and pleasant journey. Your score is affected by the way you've handled your credit in the past, and that goes back to what I've just said. Any missed payments, it will affect your credit score. Again, if you're not on the electoral roll, please do so. It's very much important that you are on the electoral roll at your current home address. That does bump up your credit score. I always recommend checkmyfile.com. It's a great website that takes reference agencies such as Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, and it provides you with all 3 agencies under one credit report. So that's checkmyfile.com. For any more news, any more questions around what I've just talked about, give us a shout directly at ourmortgagebroker.co.uk. Interest rates, not much has changed, and that's actually really, really good news. We're still finding a lot of lenders are sticking with the rates, especially when we had the Bank of England increase their rates by 0.15 in December. The Bank of England base rate is 0.25%. That hasn't made too much effect at all with the interest rates for mortgages in particular. 2-year rates and 5-year fixed rates are extremely low. We haven't seen a huge increase in those rates whatsoever. The market is extremely competitive. There are more products on the market than there were pre-COVID, which is really, really good to see. And all lenders are lending back at full loan-to-value capacity as they were pre-COVID. So it's good for those people that want to join the buy-to-let ladder, move home, or buy their first home. And as I always do, the last page is I always leave you guys with a quote, and today's quote is, "The market is more important than the property." And if you just digest those comments, it's so factual, you've got to be conscious when you're investing into real estate. You've got to be mindful about the future and the current market. And what I mean by that is do your due diligence, understand about economics, property house index prices, and so forth. Don't just worry about what are you buying it for today and what the property market looks like today. Because if you look at ONS data, the house price index has always grown. Typically, house prices grow double in every 10 to 12 years. And as you saw, in 2021, we had a 10% rise in house prices. So it certainly does happen. But what I would say is learn, if you are looking to prosper in real estate, understand the demographic and geographically where you want to invest. Know the market there, know the demographic, know what the demand looks like, and then find that property. And that's what we do as mortgage brokers. You know, we're not just here to find mortgages and submit on your behalf. We're here to advise you as well, because we speak to various types of clients every single day of the week. So do get in touch with us. We're all over social media as well. Our handle is at Our Mortgage Broker on all those various social media channels. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to reach out with us directly or through TPP, and I will stop sharing and hand over to Dil and Surinder.
Fantastic, Akhil. Thank you very much. Amazing. Just one question for you. You know what's coming, don't you?
I know. When am I joining them? I don't know, actually.
When are you moving to number 11? Talk about houses and moving.
To be honest with you, the apartment that I live in is actually number 11, to be honest with you. It really is.
Are you already there?
I actually live in number 11, yeah. I won't give my address away, but I live in number 11.
There you go.
And that's actually a fact.
How behind Rishi's thinking. This is a man that got you all the money, so when Rishi moves out, when he moves into 10 and moves on, you're obviously going to go for the PM job. So thank you very much, Akhil.
Our pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, and I know you were short of 50p's because you've been busy putting them in your gas meter, so I had to help you out there.
Yes, I haven't gone electric yet, but maybe one day.
All right. Look, folks, great little intro there. Now, special guest for you today. Fast becoming one of our regulars. Okay, look, I know she's a solicitor, but she's one of the good guys. So just hold on to that thought for a minute. Specializes in property and construction law. Magic. That's all we need. More lawyers in the construction space. But hold on. Insolvency and debt recovery. Years of post-qualification experience. Accredited commercial and civil mediator. Now that's a really good thing to be, especially for lawyers, because it means they're trying to bring you together instead of get you into a fight. She's going to kill me in a minute, actually. Today, she's going to talk about short leases. Now, we've heard the property aspect of it. Rima is going to tell us about the legal aspect of it. So, as I say every week, put down your colouring pencils, get your writing stuff out, take some notes. Rima, over to you. And we're going to put we're not going to put pound coins. We're going to put all the 50p's that you want in. So off you go. We're going to be listening.
Very much, Jill. Appreciate the great introduction. I could have let you carry on, but I think we've had enough for today, right? So I must begin now. The topic for today is lease extensions, and we're talking about residential lease extensions today. So I'm going to try and share my screen. There we are. Okay, right. So that is obviously my introduction slide that I share with you guys whenever I come on. So you've got my contact details there. Of course, in the absence of the fact that you missed these details during the course of this show, you can always contact me directly or anybody in the group, and they will be able to pass you my details. Right, so lease extensions. Most flats in England and Wales are owned on a leasehold basis. So your landlord is the person who's got the right to be able to give you the lease extension. Now, next point is leases of flats are usually granted on a 99-year basis. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, which can include 125, 200, or even 999 years. Over the time, the remaining term of the lease decreases, so does the value of that particular flat or or property. A flat with 100 or more years left on its lease can usually be quite difficult for you to sell and to increase the lease term on. Okay, so however, shorter leases may be worth less money, of course, as we've discussed. Let me just come out of this because I can't see my slides fully, so I'm going to go off track. Right, bear with me. Okay, let's start this again. Okay. That's better. Okay, fine. Right. Okay. So it's very important to keep an eye out on how long your lease, how long your flat lease is, and how many years you've got left. Because of course, as soon as it gets to the point where it's reduced to 80 years or less, it becomes quite difficult for you to be able to renew it. And the landlord can of course be in a better position to put the price up and dictate its own terms. Okay. Next slide. Okay, what do you need to do to be able to extend your lease? There is two ways in which you can extend your lease. One, by negotiating informally with your landlord, who is the freeholder, or it could be a management company. Make a formal claim under the statutory process, which is governed by, of course, that's the legal jargon there, but anybody that's interested in having a bit of a read, you can go on the Leasehold Reform, Housing and Urban Development Act 1993. So those are the two ways in which you can extend your lease, simply by informal arrangements with your landlord or by starting a statutory process. We'll go on to discussing what the statutory process entails in the next couple of slides. Okay, what are the requirements in order for you to extend your residential lease? Okay, you must have a long lease of a flat, which is usually if you were granted a lease for 21 years or more. And most long leasehold residential leases will be granted for that period of time, at least. Okay, you must have owned that lease for 2 years. That's the minimum that you've got to have owned it before you can trigger the statutory process to extend the lease term. The period of ownership here is measured from the date you become the registered owner, not from when you actually move into the flat or start living in it. Okay, it's only from when you become the registered owner, from the time of completion. And of course, we've got to be careful that if there is any change in ownership, even a transfer of the flat from a sole to a joint name, it can start the clock again as to the 2-year period that you need to have owned the flat before you can trigger the statutory process for lease extension. Okay. You may have a separate lease of other properties. So when it comes to extending it, right, it's important to bear in mind that if you've got use of a garage or a parking space or a storage cupboard or a garden, it might be possible for you to include that in the lease extension. But of course, it's dependent on certain requirements being met and your landlord agreeing to those. Under the statutory process, you are entitled to 90 years. So I've highlighted and underlined the word 90 years because you are entitled to 90 years to be added to your lease term once you start the statutory process. Okay, that's your entitlement. You can ask for more, but 90 years is what you're entitled to. For example, of course, if your lease is due to expire in 2095, you'll be granted a new lease that expires in 2185. It is not possible to claim more or less than 90 years under the statutory process. However, there is no limit as to number of times you can extend the lease under this process. So of course, you're entitled to 90 years. You can ask for more, but you can't ask for less. 90 years is your bare minimum that you're going to get, and that is your entitlement. But of course, negotiations with the landlord may mean that you get a longer term. So each case depends on its own, turns on its own facts, but 90 years is your statutory entitlement. A formal notice on your landlord, this is the process. So what you've got to do is you've got to serve a formal notice on your landlord, okay? And that's got to include information, key information about the fact that you've owned the flat for about 2 years. Okay, prove the fact that you are entitled to the lease extension. Okay, you've got to mention the price you are proposing to pay for the extension and the changes that you wish to make to the lease terms, if there are any. Okay, and a deadline for the landlord to serve a counter notice, which must be at least 2 months after the date of your notice expiry. So those are the things that are required to exist in your notice for the statutory process of lease extension. Okay. Right, what are the rights of the landlord? What the landlord's got the right to be able to request proof that you own the flat and you've done so for at least 2 years, okay? And your landlord must make this request within 21 days of you serving the notice, and the date service is, of course, a legal date. It's not obviously when you send it, it's actually when it's served. You then have 21 days to respond. Basically, what happens is after that, the landlord can also request a payment of deposit, which has to be greater than 250 and 10% of the total price that you're proposing when you would have sent your notice to the landlord. The landlord may request deposit any time after the service of your notice, and you've got 21 days to pay that, that request for payment for the deposit. The landlord can also inspect the flat, request for you to allow inspection of the flat at a reasonable time, as long as it gives you at least 3 days notice, okay? So the landlord would typically use this right for valuation purposes as to what the market rate is, what's the property condition, and so on and forth. And you've got to be reasonable with that. It's a complicated formula, and it's not my area of specialty. It's more for surveyors as to how you determine the price for what you pay for the lease extension. There's various factors that go into it, which is the value of the flat at the date your notice was served, the amount of time that's left of the lease, and of course we said if it goes under 80, it starts to reduce, and the ground rent. And some of these figures used in the formula can be subjective because every flat will have its own value, will have its own ground rent, and in its own terms that are outstanding, that are left in that particular lease. You can, an online lease extension calculator can give you a rough estimate, but generally, you know, every property is individual because of its condition and so on and forth. So it's not ideal, but it can give you a rough estimate if you do use that online lease calculator. But I do recommend that you rely on surveyors to give you that indication. A lease extension used in statutory process is not quick. It can take a year or more after your notice has been sent. And then of course, there's negotiations with the landlord, which can take a long time if there are disagreements about the terms or the value. After your notice has been served, the landlord must serve a formal counter notice on you by the deadline set out in your notice, okay? Assuming that the landlord accepts your claim, it must state whether it agrees or disagrees with every proposal that you've made and provide alternative proposals with the ones that he doesn't agree with. So if you've said, look, I want this to change in the term of the lease, or I want X and Y to be included in the new lease extension, then he has to either agree or disagree to everything that you've proposed, and they have to come back with alternative proposals if there are points which are not agreed. Okay. After the counter notice from the landlord has been served, negotiations usually happen between surveyors and lawyers to finalize any points, including the price. Okay, if agreement cannot be reached, then we will normally, what we do for our clients is apply to the tribunal and ask for them to settle the dispute. The application to the tribunal must be made by the date 6 months after the landlord's counter notice expires. So if not, what happens is that the time frame expires and then you cannot start a new claim for 12 months. So once you've agreed the price and the terms of the lease extension with the landlord, you then have 4 months to pay that price that has been proposed and agreed, okay, and all relevant costs to complete the lease extension. If it looks like the completion will not occur, then obviously what we as solicitors will do is make an application to court to protect your position and your claim, because if you leave it, then your claim will expire and then you have to restart the process. And there's strict timeframes that you must comply with. And if they expire, then of course you run the risk of having to restart the process. And of course, that's what the next point says. Right. The next slide says, should you wait for the new changes to come into force before extending your lease? The government has outlined proposals to make it easier for and cheaper for tenants to of flats to extend their leases. These include extending the term by 999 years as opposed to 90 years as it currently stands, and different ways of calculating the price to reduce the cost. However, there's a lot of work, as you can imagine, that needs to go into it, and we don't know as to when these new changes will be announced and when they will be formalized. So really and truly, should you wait? It really very much depends on how long you've got on your lease, whether you're looking to sell it, and so on and so forth. But of course, if you've got any other questions on this, it's a very brief summary of how to extend your lease. But if you've got further questions, then feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to assist. And that's it from me, everybody.
Wow, nice. Nice and short.
Yes.
Nice and short, like a short lease. Sorry. I
That's it.
haven't got my camera on. Right. Hang on. Can't get my camera on. All right. I've obviously been barred from getting. Oh. Okay. Right. So, quick question.
Mhm.
When the landlord receives the notice,
Yeah.
how much time do they have to respond?
So you've got to highlight the time frame. They've got 21 days to respond.
They have 21 days. Yeah.
Mhm.
And if they don't come back to you within 21 days, does that mean it's deemed to be accepted?
Well, yes, that's what the general rule of thumb says, is that it's deemed to be accepted, and then you write to them and your solicitors will guide you through the process to the fact that, okay, they haven't objected to it. But of course, a lot of the times what we see in practice is that as soon as you sort of write and make an application to the court, that's when you get a reaction from the landlords and say, hang on, issues of service and so on and forth. So it's very important to make sure that your deemed acceptance is actually not going to be challenged later on.
So,
You can end up spending a lot of money in legal fees and arguing that point. So it's very important to make sure that you're relying on that deemed acceptance, but it's not something that you're likely to face challenge and spend legal fees on in arguing in tribunal.
and waste your money on lawyers
Yes, well,
unnecessarily.
yeah.
Right. Okay. So you talk about deemed service there,
Yeah.
and that's not the same as the date on the notice. Can you
No.
go into that a little bit, please?
So normally what we say deemed service is, it's the second working day from the day you post it. So that's sort of the civil procedure rules. Really and truly, that's when the time frame would start to trigger to say, okay, that's from the date it's been served, and then you count the time frame of 21 days thereafter.
So when you're serving it by post, you should not record a delivery. Is that right?
Well, you can do recorded delivery, but normally you do first class, because recorded delivery can come back and then you're waiting on it. So if you want to rely on the fact that I've sent it and is deemed served, and that's something you're relying on in court later on, and the landlord says, well, I never received it, you're saying, well, actually, under the civil procedure rules, it's deemed served.
Brilliant. And yeah, because we have to do this for party wall notices as well. Sorry. Can you email? Does that count as service?
If they've got solicitors on board, some solicitors, for example, will have at the bottom of their email, we don't accept service by email. There is electronic ways, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's always best to sort of send it first class post. Lots more people, if you know that the emails are active and it's a way of communication between you and the landlord, and has been the traditional and prime way of communicating between you and the landlord, then yes, there is that argument there that you'd say that's how we normally communicate. But if there are solicitors involved, sometimes it does say at the bottom of the emails to say we won't accept service by email.
Then no one's listening. Let me into the secret. Why don't solicitors like getting emails? Because they say don't send us email stuff, don't they? I've seen that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think it's there's so many emails that we receive on a daily basis. It's things like that are easily missed, whereas some things comes in the post, it'll be landed on our desk and we action it, whereas emails, you get thousands of emails in a day. And also it's more so to make it in line with, it gives you sometimes a little bit more time, because sometimes people will send things an email and then you get a couple more days because you've not received it by post yet. So many tricks of the trade.
What about the poor trees? Surinder, you got some, I guess you've got a few questions, haven't you?
Yes, certainly. Starting with ownership of the flat for 2 years or more, and the date starts from the registered owner ownership. Now, you can complete today, but that won't be registered today, will it?
No, so it's from the date of ownership.
So what is the date? Is it as in law?
So, sorry,
you on the flat. You own the flat on the day you exchange, because you have to insure it.
Sorry, repeat your question. So you're talking about the issue of completion. So
No, issue of the ownership date.
yeah, so it's from the time legally that you own it.
Well,
Okay, so that
legally, I own it from the day I exchange. Isn't that true?
no, not technically. No, you've not completed the
You have,
transaction.
well, no, because you have to register, you have to insure the flat because it's your responsibility from that date on.
Exchanging the contracts triggers an obligation that you have to
Okay.
complete, but it doesn't give you legal ownership of the property. You don't, unless you're simultaneously exchanging and completing,
Right.
you don't complete on, you just by exchange that
Okay.
we will complete. That's not the same as legal ownership of the property.
Okay, so if I complete today, it'll take the solicitor some time to register.
Yeah, that's fine.
What date will that be?
So it's from the date of completion.
Completion. Okay, that's fine.
Because registration can sometimes take 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're expected to wait.
Not the date land registry shows. Is that right?
No, it's from the date, because the land registry will show from the date you completed it usually. So it's from the date of completion, because that's when you become the legal owner of the property.
Right. We're giving you an extra hard time today. Akhil, sorry, Surinder, can I pause you for a minute, see if Akhil's got any?
I've got a couple of questions. Thank you. I wanted to ask, with regards to lease extensions, now, a lot of freeholders try to hold the tenant to ransom with the extension lease fees. What's the best way of negotiating these fees? Because I find it's a finger up in the air and say, should I charge 20 or should I charge 30,000 on this occasion? Is there a way of, is there a standard calculation, or is it just whatever the freeholder wants to charge?
Well, the standard calculation is usually what's sort of, you're talking about not the value of the lease, you're talking about the landlord's cost. So it really does come down to negotiations. There is no formula to calculating that, but it does come down to when the landlord has proposed a figure, speaking to the surveyor, and whatever the legal costs are as well. It's about how you negotiate that with the landlord, with the market price. So it does eventually, unfortunately, come down to negotiations.
Right.
Surely.
I always tell my clients that you've got to look at similar properties to yours with the lease that you're trying to get to, and see what the value of that is, because obviously the lease keeps dropping and the value does drop in line with the lease typically. So that's the way I go about it. But it's just a bit of there is no rule of thumb, right?
I think the term is marriage value.
Sorry, Jill.
I think I'm not a lease extension surveyor, so I don't actually know what goes on here, but I've heard that it's the marriage value, i.e. it's the difference between the short lease and what you're going to get.
Long lease, yeah. I mean, there is methods by which surveyors will calculate it. That's why I don't tend to sort of, get involved in that. For me, I'd always recommend, if you can't reach a settlement or an agreement with your landlord, it's best to get a surveyor involved who will be able to see what the market trends are, and of course the condition of the property, how long is left, and things like that. So, yeah.
Okay, so if the landlord has the right to inspect the flat to ascertain, what if it is a dilapidated flat? Whose responsibility is that?
Depends
is
on the lease.
Is a leasehold? Oh, okay, I appreciate that.
So
but most long leases, it will be the lessee's responsibility.
Yes. So of course, it's really a case about, sorry, finish your question first, Surinder.
so the marriage value, which, if I'm not mistaken, what I have negotiated before, and my understanding is that it is determined for various factors. What is the current rental, rent, ground rent, how many years there's to left on the lease, and some other factors. And there are some formulas the surveyors use to get to this marriage value. But if we can't agree, then it obviously goes to arbitration. So when the landlord inspects the flat, they will determine what the value of the flat is.
Not
The landlord surveyor will
Yeah.
determine what the value of the extension value is, which if we do it right, my surveyor will say, no, I don't agree with it. And unless they can get an agreement, we'll have to go to arbitration. Is that correct?
tribunal, yeah.
Yeah.
You go to the tribunal, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's various factors. A lot of the times, two surveyors might not agree, and there would be reasons. So you'd prepare what's called a Scott schedule. You guys might have come across it, to say what are the different surveyors' difference of opinions are, and what their reasoning is, what your response is to that. Because it could be a case that one says the market value is extended or is higher because of X, Y, and Z factor, but then your surveyor might actually say, well, actually that factor is negated by such and such argument. So, those negotiations between lawyers, once surveyors are appointed, you prepare a Scott schedule and things like that, can take a while, because sometimes the other side will see sense to it, and they know that they're not going to stand in that argument in court. So they would those kind of issues and dispute will be minimized. It's only a case that if they can't resolve those differences, then you have to go to the tribunal, and the tribunal will make a finding, and there might be a third jointly appointed surveyor that will be appointed through the process that the court will rely upon.
Third surveyor.
Sorry?
You could get a third surveyor in that.
Yeah.
You could, yeah.
Okay, now you can extend the lease. Say I have already extended the lease for 90 years, agreed, paid, and done today. Can I tomorrow go and apply for another 90 years?
You've got to, I believe, as far as I'm aware, you've got to leave it some time before you can actually extend it again, because you're entitled to 90 years at one time. I don't quote me on how long it is that you must wait before you can apply for another extension. But I believe there are provisions in place for that.
Surinder, why are you being greedy? Why do you want two extensions?
Well, if I'm entitled to it, why shouldn't I get it?
Yeah. If you're, the best way is, there is nothing really stopping you from negotiating directly. And if you think about the costs that you're saving of starting up another process, if you include those costs in the first sort of statute process, when you trigger it, to say, right, okay, I'm going to end up spending, because it was a battle first time round, I'm going to end up spending about a couple of thousand again in the process of extending it. Why don't you offer that and add that as an incentive premium in the first time round to get a longer term agreed with the landlord?
Okay.
Because that probably makes more commercial sense than having to wait to start the process again.
Sure.
No, Surinder, he'll ask for 3 lots of 90 years.
There is, look, the quickest way is to try and sort of agree. If the landlord doesn't respond, then of course what you do is make an application, and then your report will stand, and whatever you've asked for the court will grant, because it's a straightforward statutory process. So if the landlord doesn't respond, you make an application, and then your surveyor's report will be, or your draft lease, what you propose in terms of rent, new term and rent and ground rent and so on and forth, would be presented to the court, and the court has to go with that because the landlord has missed his time frame to respond.
This 21-day thing, once they miss it, they're out of the picture. Yeah. Go on. Bingo. Now.
Right. Sorry, one more a further question is
just an extra couple of 50p, Surinder. Just going on your tab.
I'm charging for this now.
Yeah.
I got to put it
the point is that the I've lost but I got the other one. After the landlord has responded after 21 days, and when do you have to pay the deposit? Is it after his response or after the agreement of the terms?
So it would naturally be, so once the terms are agreed, the landlord will respond, the terms
Right.
will be agreed, and then the landlord will say, this is the value of what I want, and then you've got to pay it at that stage within a time frame. So it's really, once the terms are finalized, only then the payment will be, because it's normally a case that the payment would only be requested in the response if your terms are agreed.
Agreed.
Does that make
Now,
sense?
yeah, you said you can make variations to the lease. Can you revamp the lease altogether?
Can you what, sorry?
Revamp the lease, propose a completely new lease with new terms.
Well, you can propose new terms, but it's about whether or not they will be
Accept it.
agreed. Yeah, so you know what you've got is the existing lease, which has been running for many years before that. So you wouldn't be changing, because the lease can sometimes be 50, 60 pages. You wouldn't be changing everything in that lease. You'd be only changing term, ground rent, and rent review clauses and things like that.
But well, the ground rent will go to zero, won't it?
Yeah. So it's really whatever it is that that's important to you,
Yeah.
which wouldn't necessarily be obligations, you know, under the lease, because those obligations can be quite certain. Unless you find that there's an onerous obligation in there, you can seek to propose it be amended, but you wouldn't waste your time amending a 60 or proposing a 60-page new lease.
But you could, if you wanted to, put in a clause for.
Technically, that would be a new lease, not an extension. So you
Sure.
have to look at it as an extension. You propose standard terms to be renewed, which are normally your rent. And your
I think the answer is no, Surinder. Right. Akhil, no, you've been greedy there, Surinder. Akhil, have you got any last questions?
I did have a quick one. If I'm buying from you, Rima, a property, and the leasehold property's only got, let's call it 70 years on the lease, is it better for you to apply for the extension? Because if I'm not wrong, I can't apply for an extension when I purchased it until 24 months have lapsed, right?
Yeah, so I can start the statute process and then you can take over.
Right, so you can apply, you and I exchange and complete, and then once the lease is granted, the extension, my lease will get extended.
Yeah. So I will start the statute process whilst I own it, 2 years, and then you can take over, and then you can actually sort of complete the rest of the process to completion.
What happens if the freeholder, wants to push back or whatever, for whatever reason? Are you still obligated to still remain in the communication and do whatever you've got to do? Or is it because you've now sold and completed, you're done now with me? And
well, that's it, you're done technically, aren't you?
Yeah.
Unless you agree with your with whoever it is that you're buying from to say, until it completes, or we're exchanging on the condition that we're going to be able to get this extension, or whatever the terms are, a separate contract or a side letter, they're not really liable for it.
Right. And typically a lease extension, I know drawing up a lease is quite straightforward and relying on the freehold to return and agree, but in what's the average timescale to extend a lease and have it drawn up and filed and archived?
A new lease?
Yeah, an extension. Yeah, an extension.
A new lease extension?
Yes, yeah.
Well, it depends how protracted it becomes. So it can take up to a year or two, but if it's straightforward, everything's agreed, we can turn it around in about 6 to 8 weeks.
Right, okay. So it's better to start it on day one of the sale and purchase, I guess. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Pleasure as usual, everyone. Thank you.
Akhil, you just stole my question, but just to emphasize that, Rima, the extension is transferable, but I understand the key point is if you mess that notice up, it doesn't count. And that's why you should probably get a solicitor to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important, this process of lease extension, there's strict timeframes. So it's very important to make sure you get everything right that needs to go with the notice. You get everything right in terms of when it needs to be responded to, what you need to do in terms of responding, and the implications of you missing those deadlines, really, most crucial for landlords. And of course, if there is anything missed in terms of what you can ask to vary, because that's your opportunity, just as Surinder pointed out, there could be some clauses that you want to seek to amend. So your lawyer can look at that lease and actually identify, can we seek to vary that? with our proposed terms. So it's very important to make sure that your lease is reviewed and you make those proposals in the notice that are going to benefit you for the remainder of the term and make it more marketable for the future.
Yeah, so
A final question, please.
I think so now.
last one, Surinder, this is it.
Okay. You know,
No, Surinder, feel free to contact me. That's not a problem. But yeah.
just when the landlord has inspected the flat and drawn up a schedule of dilapidation, who's responsible? The leaseholder is responsible, but can the value of the flat then is on that or calculated after the dilapidation schedule has been completed? And can the landlord say, I'm not going to go any further until this schedule of dilapidation has been met and completed?
The landlord can suggest that. I mean, technically, if you look at what they've got to reply within a certain time frame. Okay, they can suggest that, but the court tribunals are not going to look on that very favorably because you're entitled. Once you've triggered the process, you're entitled to a 90-year extension. That's your statutory right. So you can't hold your leaseholder to ransom because there are dilapidations. That could be reflected in the value, and that could be reflected in other terms that you agree with each other, but you can't hold your tenant onto ransom for the entitlement that they have to extend the lease.
Fair enough. Thank you. That was the final.
Thank you so much.
Right. Rima, as this is from previous discussions, this is quite a complicated area.
Yes.
Goofing up the notice is not a good option, really, especially if you're buying it. Could you put your details up to make sure? So I've had other calls on this subject and people have said, don't mess up the notice. It's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth messing up the notices at all, no.
There you go. So look, get your notices done properly. There's the expert on it. I can't help you with the notice or the lease extension. It's not what I do. So there you go.
Anybody, any further questions, feel free to get in touch. Those are my contact details again for ease of reference.
Fantastic. Now, when are you next coming and what are you going to talk about next time?
Hopefully when I'm given a bit more notice to prepare.
Don't blame me for that one.
It's all Surinder. He asked me in such a polite way, I can't ever say no.
Oh, thank you.
Be careful what he asks. Be careful what you say yes to with Surinder. All right, folks. I'm going to disappear. I think it's home time now, although we're technically home anyway. What have we got on next week, or is that still a secret, Surinder?
Every week is a secret.
All right. Secret super special guest next week, so join us. Thank you, Rima. Really enlightening.
And just keep the 24th, Thursday 24th free for a social evening.
Is that the 24th of February?
That's right, yes.
We've passed January now, right?
Yep.
We've made it through January. Well done. That's like one of my jokes. We've made it through January, yes. Nearly. Monday we will have finished January. By next week we will have finished January. Right. So Surinder's let the cat out the bag. 24th of February, viewers, folks, keep it free. I don't know what they're up to. No comment. I'm going to disappear now, and probably all going to have to disappear.
Anyway, thank you very much, Rima and Akil.
Thank you, guys.
See everybody next week.
All right.
And Dil too, finally.
Thank you. All right.
Everyone. See you later. Bye. Bye.
See you soon. Yeah, bye.
And viewers on YouTube, like.